I've collected 170 unusual historical photos that you might have missed. Let's get 1,000 subscribers on this channel. I will be very grateful to you. A Chinese soldier fires a Czech-designed ZB-26 light machine gun during the Battle of Changsha in January 1942. Chinese forces stopped a major Japanese offensive there, turning Changsha into one of Japan's most costly defeats in China. The SS Eastland rolled onto its side while still tied to a Chicago dock in 1915, trapping hundreds below deck. The disaster killed 844 people, including 22 entire families, before the ship even began its journey. Boston police officers pose with stacks of seized political literature beside a police ambulance in 1919. The raid came during the first Red Scare, when authorities targeted suspected radicals and destroyed their publications. Len Tao and Jan Mashiani were Tswana tribesmen who became the first black Africans to compete in the modern Olympics. They ran the 1904 marathon barefoot, and Len Tao finished 9th, despite being chased nearly a mile off course by dogs. During the Burma campaign from 1941 to 1945, a Japanese soldier marches beside elephants used to carry weapons, food, and other supplies. These animals could cross flooded rivers, deep mud, and dense jungle where military trucks often failed. Mahatma Gandhi rides a bicycle toward evening prayers at Sabarmati Ashram, followed closely by two companions. The rare photograph shows one of history's most famous leaders traveling without guards, a motorcade, or any sign of power. In 1968, a New York restaurant used a woman as a living menu, writing its dishes and prices directly across her body. Customers could choose their meal without opening a menu, a publicity stunt that would cause outrage today. This X-ray shows the crushed and deformed bones of a Chinese woman whose feet were tightly bound from childhood. The brutal practice folded 4 toes under the sole and forced the foot into a tiny shape, causing lifelong pain, infection, and difficulty walking. United States Navy divers secured Gemini 5 after Gordon Cooper and Charles Conrad splashed down in the Atlantic Ocean on August 29, 1965. A computer programming error sent them about 140 kilometers off target after a record-breaking 8 days in space. Ham the chimpanzee is strapped into his capsule before his historic spaceflight on January 31, 1961. He survived the 16-minute mission and proved that humans could perform tasks in space. Taken at Awenga in 1873, this photograph shows Moriori men wearing both European and traditional clothing. Several hold wooden staffs while rare albatross feathers are tied into their beards. In August 1945, Soviet T-34 tanks crossed the Greater Khingan Mountains during the invasion of Japanese-held Manchuria. Japan considered this rugged route nearly impassable, so the rapid armored advance caught the Kwantung Army by surprise. An immigrant family waits at Ellis Island in New York around 1900, where officials examined every newcomer for illness and legal problems. Even one suspicious symptom could mean detention or deportation, separating a family just before they entered America. A Soviet soldier shares tobacco with captured German troops in Stalingrad in February 1943. After the surrender, about 90,000 exhausted Axis soldiers entered captivity, and only a small fraction ever returned home. In 1989, crowds climbed the Berlin Wall near Checkpoint Charlie as East Germany's border system collapsed. For decades, this crossing had been one of the most guarded gateways between West and East Berlin. East German guards add barbed wire to the Berlin Wall in 1972 as a family watches from West Berlin. The deadly border system included watchtowers, patrol roads, alarms, and armed guards ordered to stop anyone trying to escape. Kyiv in 1931, when a major Dnieper flood turned city streets into canals and forced residents into boats. Such disasters repeatedly struck the low-lying Podil district before modern dams began controlling the river. In May 1968, riot police stormed student barricades in Paris's Latin Quarter during violent street battles. The uprising soon triggered a nationwide general strike involving around 10 million workers and brought France close to a complete shutdown. In Normandy in 1944, a French dairymaid led her cows through a field packed with 1,000-pound British bombs. The deadly weapons lay beside grazing cattle before being loaded onto Royal Air Force planes. This 1901 film shows one of the earliest recorded offensive V signs made by a worker outside a British steelworks. Decades before it meant peace, the gesture was already used as a sharp insult. An Australian soldier stares into the camera at a crowded dressing station near Ypres in 1917. His shattered expression became an early visual record of shell shock, the psychological trauma now known as post-traumatic stress disorder. British Red Cross nurses wear gas masks near the front line in Flanders, where German poison gas threatened medical staff as well as soldiers. Their crude masks offered limited protection against chlorine, a weapon that could blind, suffocate, and kill within minutes. In February 1972, a week-long blizzard buried parts of Iran under more than 3 meters of snow and killed over 4,000 people. Around 200 villages vanished beneath the snow, and in some communities, not a single person survived. In Okinawa in 1945, an American serviceman shared his rations with 2 Japanese children left hungry by one of the Pacific War's bloodiest battles. The fighting killed more than 100,000 civilians and destroyed much of the island's food supply. In 1947, a woman stood on Omaha Beach beside ships wrecked during the Allied invasion of German-occupied France 3 years earlier. David Seymour's photograph shows how the remains of war still dominated Normandy long after the soldiers had gone. In 1961, neurologist Oliver Sacks set a California weightlifting record by squatting 600 pounds. Years before writing The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, he was also a powerful bodybuilder, nicknamed Dr. Squat. During the 1928 Tour de France, Italian rider Giusto Cerruti carried his wrecked bicycle after a crash left its front wheel useless. Race rules banned outside help, so he walked on alone, injured and exhausted, in one of cycling's most unforgettable photographs. On January 12, 1945, United States Navy carrier aircraft struck the Japanese cruiser Kashi in the South China Sea. A torpedo hit her ammunition storage, triggering a massive explosion that sank the ship in minutes and killed more than 600 men. This 1941 portrait shows Ewa Kochever, the Polish Jewish writer who ran Eve's Hangout, a famous lesbian tea room in Greenwich Village. Deported from America for moral turpitude after publishing Lesbian Love, she was arrested in France and murdered at Auschwitz in 1943. United States Marines inspect a destroyed Japanese H-8K flying boat on Saipan in July 1944. Nicknamed Emily by the Allies, this massive aircraft carried powerful defensive guns and could fly more than 7,000 kilometers on long-range patrols. In 1978, a reporter assigned to write Mary Dufour's obituary uncovered evidence that she was actually Anna Muriel Sizer. Her brother rejected the discovery because accepting it meant admitting his family had abandoned her in institutions for the criminally insane for 50 years. These are some of the 650,000 guns destroyed after the 1996 Port Arthur massacre killed 35 people and wounded 23. Australia quickly tightened its gun laws and launched a nationwide firearm buyback. Fanta was created in 1940 by Coca-Cola's German branch after World War II blocked imports of American syrup. This strange photo shows a child posing with a giant stiff polar bear used to promote the new drink. On Bloody Sunday in 1972, British soldiers shot 27 unarmed civil rights marchers in Derry, killing 14. Some victims were shot in the back while fleeing, while others were hit as they tried to help the wounded. In the 1930s, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was photographed fishing with his longtime deputy, Clyde Tolson. The two men were nearly inseparable for decades, vacationed together, and are buried only a few yards apart. In 1984, John Candy, Tom Hanks, and Eugene Levy watched as special effects artists created a full-body mold of Daryl Hannah for Splash. The mold helped build her famous mermaid tail, which was so convincing that Disney later removed a nude scene from streaming. In 1969, an unidentified Black Panther member peeks through a door riddled with bullet holes after police blasted it during a pre-dawn raid. Beside him, a poster advertises free breakfasts for children and political education, revealing the community programs that helped make the Panthers powerful targets. Stephen and Viola Armstrong watched from their Ohio home as their son Neil landed on the moon on July 20, 1969. Hours later, he became the first human to walk on another world. In 1911, Jacques-Henri Lartigue photographed his brother Zissou floating in a homemade tire boat at Château du Rouzat. Lartigue's playful images later became a major visual influence on Wes Anderson and his carefully staged worlds. 7-year-old Prince William took this candid photograph of Princess Diana at home in 1989. Away from royal photographers, she appears relaxed and playful through the eyes of her young son. In 1979, 2 East German families secretly built a hot air balloon and escaped across the heavily guarded border. They endured 28 minutes at -8 degrees Celsius in a gondola made from clothesline railing, then landed 10 kilometers inside West Germany. These black prisoners were leased to harvest timber in Florida around 1903, decades after slavery was abolished. Southern states used racist arrests and forced prison labor to supply private companies with cheap workers, while brutal conditions killed thousands. In 1962, this man demanded a ban on dresses that exposed women's knees while seated, calling modest clothing God's law. Just a few years later, the miniskirt became a global fashion sensation. In 1983, artist David Hammond secretly sold carefully arranged snowballs on a New York sidewalk, pricing them by size like ordinary street goods. The performance vanished as the snow melted, leaving Dawood Bey's rare photographs and a lasting challenge to how art gains value. In 1980, Paul McCartney was arrested in Japan after customs officers found more than 7 ounces of marijuana in his luggage. He faced years in prison, but after 10 days behind bars, he was deported and his tour was canceled. On August 13, 1972, 67-year-old Karl Wallenda crossed a tightrope 140 feet above a packed Philadelphia stadium. He even performed a headstand midway through the walk and earned $3,000. In 1935, Ernest Hemingway aimed a submachine gun aboard his yacht, Pilar, while hunting sharks off Cuba. He carried weapons at sea and later claimed he searched the Caribbean for German submarines during the Second World War. In 1925, Catherine McHale Slaughterback faced 140 rattlesnakes while protecting her 3-year-old son. After firing her only 3 bullets, she used a no hunting sign to kill the rest and later made a dress from their skins. In 1965, Oak Ridge engineers proposed hanging adjustable chairs above each other to pack more people into a nuclear bomb shelter. The design used only 4 square feet per person, turning empty wall space into a grim emergency seating system. In 1944, Brigitte Hitler said goodbye to her son, William Patrick, as he left to serve in the United States Navy. Adolf Hitler's nephew had publicly attacked his infamous uncle in an article titled, "Why I Hate My Uncle." This Soviet partisan posed in German-occupied territory in 1944 with a drum-fed submachine gun, grenades, and belts of ammunition. Partisans used forests and hidden camps to sabotage railways, ambush troops, and disrupt German supply lines. In 1911, King George V hunted in Nepal for 10 days with a crew of 12,000 people. The expedition killed 39 tigers, 18 rhinoceroses, and 4 bears, turning the animals into trophies of royal power. These photographs from Paris's Salpêtrière Hospital show a woman labeled with hysterical yawning, a supposed symptom of hysteria. In the 19th century, doctors turned female patients into medical spectacles, using staged images to classify behavior they barely understood. In 1987, 19-year-old West German pilot Matthias Rust slipped through Soviet air defenses and landed his Cessna near Red Square. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison, but released after 14 months. In the 1940s, Margaret Gibb kisses her fiancé while her conjoined sister Mary watches inches away. Margaret became engaged to Carlos Daniel Josefe in 1929, but although they applied for a marriage license, the wedding never happened. Germany, the 1940s. The first Volkswagen Beetles leave Wolfsburg by train. Their split rear windows reveal an early design that disappeared in 1953. Richard Kiel, who stood 7 feet 2 inches tall, poses with Barbara Bach during The Spy Who Loved Me in 1977. Kiel played the steel-toothed villain Jaws, while Bach played Soviet agent Anya Amasova. In December 1924, a patient of Dr. Bourget was photographed before and after plastic surgery to straighten the bridge of her nose. Bourget was a member of the French Academy of Medicine, making these images a rare record of early cosmetic surgery. Arthur J. Murphy lost both lower legs and forearms to severe frostbite during the Great Blizzard of 1888. He later became a sideshow lecturer, showing audiences how he handled daily tasks with prosthetic limbs and selling booklets instead of charging admission. On April 18, 1991, wrecked vehicles still covered Highway 80, the road used by Iraqi forces fleeing Kuwait. Coalition aircraft had attacked the retreating convoys weeks earlier, leaving one of the Gulf War's most disturbing scenes. In 1997, students in Angola attended class inside a war-damaged school, surrounded by shattered concrete and exposed steel. Their lessons continued during a civil war that devastated the country for decades. In 1914, villagers captured a suspected German spy who had disguised himself as a woman to move unnoticed. His clothing fooled no one, and this photograph records the moment his dangerous mission came to an abrupt end. This bizarre 4-cylinder scooter was built in 1919 when inventors were testing new forms of personal transport. Its oversized engine and tiny platform made it look more like a machine from the future than a vehicle from over a century ago. This photo is often falsely claimed to show Jean-Paul Sartre listening to Hitler in Berlin in 1934. Sartre was studying philosophy in the city, but there is no credible evidence that the circled man is him. This was not Gillette testing a razor in 1850, but a staged photograph of a leg amputation. Gillette was founded only in 1901, more than 50 years after the claimed date. Jack Nicholson and Nancy Smith attended their senior prom together in 1953, years before he became one of Hollywood's most famous actors. Nicholson was only 16, and his legendary film career was still 5 years away. 8-year-old Bill Paxton can be seen above the crowd as President John Kennedy spoke in Fort Worth in 1963. Hours after this photograph, Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. This surveillance photo shows 19-year-old Patty Hearst robbing a San Francisco bank with the Symbionese Liberation Army on April 15, 1974. Kidnapped by the group 2 months earlier, she was later convicted, had her sentence commuted by President Jimmy Carter, and was pardoned by President Bill Clinton. In 1953, Miss World contestants stood on an airplane wing while a crowd watched from below. The polished metal reflected their legs upside down, creating this strange image without any camera trick. Chinese laborers earned just $1 a day, while American workers often demanded $2.50. They also moved and managed their own camps, making them cheaper to hire and fueling fierce resentment among local workers. In 1915, Armenian women and children were imprisoned in an Ottoman camp during the Armenian Genocide, which killed up to 1.5 million people. Many mothers were later separated from their children, while Turkey still refuses to recognize the killings as genocide. In 1978, A bomb hidden in a bin exploded outside Sydney's Hilton Hotel during a major Commonwealth summit. The blast killed 3 people and injured 11, while its target and the identity of the bomber remain disputed. An iron worker poses inside a Stalingrad factory in 1932 during Stalin's brutal industrial drive. Just 10 years later, the city's factories became a battlefield where workers repaired tanks and weapons while German forces fought only streets away. In 1951, photographer Ruth Orkin captured Ninely Craig walking past staring men in Florence, Italy, not Mexico City. The famous image, called American Girl in Italy, was part of a series showing what women faced while traveling alone. This is the Italian torpedo boat MAS-15, commanded by Luigi Rizzo in 1918. Its 2 torpedoes sank the massive Austro-Hungarian battleship Szent István, killing 89 sailors and capturing the disaster on film. This photograph from the United States in 1936 shows a woman tied to a tree during a bondage role-play scene. Her dramatic expression suggests fear, but the image was staged for the camera. In 1938, Spanish anarchists turned an ordinary vehicle into this bizarre armored machine, covering it with curved steel plates. The letters FAI and CNT linked it to powerful anarchist groups fighting Franco's forces. A burning race car lies upside down during the 1962 Belgian Grand Prix as other drivers speed past. Incredibly, the trapped driver escaped with only minor injuries. Yugoslav partisan Stjepan Filipović raised his fists moments before his public execution by the Nazis in 1942. He shouted, "Death to fascism, freedom to the people," and this photograph became a symbol of resistance. In 1915, German soldiers used an elephant to haul massive logs near the Western Front because horses were desperately scarce. The animal had been taken from a zoo and put to work moving loads that normally required several horses. On August 8, 1963, a gang stopped this Royal Mail train and escaped with more than £2.6 million. Most of the stolen cash vanished forever, while the mysterious mastermind, known as the Ulsterman, was never identified. 17-year-old Jonathan Jackson holds Judge Harold Haley at gunpoint during the Marin County Courthouse takeover on August 7, 1970. Jackson demanded freedom for the Soledad brothers, including his brother George, but police opened fire, killing Jackson, Haley, and 2 prisoners. At the 1939 Smelt Carnival in Marinette, Wisconsin, wrestlers fought inside a ring covered with thousands of slippery fish. The bizarre match celebrated the huge spring smelt runs that once filled local rivers and drew massive crowds. French soldiers pose with their regiment's shredded battle flag in 1917, its silk torn apart by months of frontline combat. French military colors carried the regiment's identity and battle honors, so protecting them from enemy capture was a matter of immense pride. In London in 1901, Adelaide Springett was so ashamed of her worn boots that she removed them before Horace Warner took this photograph. She was one of the poor children Warner documented in Spitalfields, revealing the harsh reality of life in the East End. In 1923, horse diving drew huge crowds as riders guided horses off towers up to 60 feet high. The dangerous stunt became a major attraction at Atlantic City's Steel Pier. On April 4, 1917, German soldiers trained with a flamethrower designed to clear enemy trenches at close range. Its operator carried pressurized fuel tanks, making him both a deadly attacker and a highly vulnerable target. In 1941, a Spanish muskrat trapper on Louisiana's Delacroix Island hung his catch to dry before skinning. Muskrat fur was a valuable wetland commodity, and trappers often sold the meat as well. Workers carve a tunnel through solid rock for Australia's Snowy Mountains hydroelectric scheme, built from 1949 to 1968. The vast project created 16 dams and more than 145 kilometers of tunnels, while over 100,000 workers from more than 30 countries helped build it. In 1962, workers in Wittenoom, Western Australia, competed to shovel deadly blue asbestos waste into drums. The town was later abandoned after its mines exposed thousands of people to fibers that can cause fatal lung disease decades later. This child worker smiled for the camera after a long shift in New York City in 1924. Children like him could work up to 12 hours a day, often for very little pay. Larry King posed for this mugshot on December 20th, 1971, after being accused of keeping $5,000 meant for Jim Garrison's Kennedy assassination investigation. The charges were later dropped because the statute of limitations had expired. On September 8, 1923, 7 United States Navy destroyers followed a navigation error and smashed into the rocks at Honda Point, California. 23 sailors died in the largest peacetime loss of United States Navy ships. In 1941, a Chinese worker carried heavy tin ingots by hand inside a British smelting plant in Malaya. Tin made the colony one of the world's leading producers, while workers endured extreme heat and brutal physical labor. Workers at the Sloss Sheffield iron mines in Alabama pose after a brutal shift in 1910, including boys employed in dangerous underground jobs. The lamps fixed to their caps provided the only light around collapsing rock, explosives, and deadly mine gases. In September and October 1986, Chernobyl liquidators shoveled highly radioactive debris from the roof of reactor number 3. Robots failed in the intense radiation, so men called biorobots worked in shifts lasting only seconds. In December 1970, protesters set fire to the ruling Communist Party headquarters in Gdansk after police opened fire on striking workers. The revolt began over sudden food price increases, and the government's violent crackdown killed dozens along Poland's Baltic coast. Japanese bombers struck the passenger cargo ship Makdui at Port Moresby on June 18, 1942, killing 8 crew members. Burning and unable to steer, she drifted onto a reef near Hanubata, rolled onto her side, and remains a local landmark today. Born without hands and with shortened legs, Nanny May Hill learned to walk at 6 and mastered writing, sewing, and painting with her feet. She paid for college by selling art, won first prize at the 1919 Texas State Fair, ran businesses, entered politics, and later became a sideshow performer. A newly arrived immigrant stands beside a pretzel vendor on a New York street in 1896. Street sellers like her fed the city's growing crowds cheaply, while newcomers often entered America with little more than the clothes they wore. On May 7, 1940, Soviet police arrested 14-year-old Viktor Savinik and 9 other students for protesting grain shipments to Germany, while Soviet citizens were starving. The teenagers, aged 14 to 17, were accused of a counter-revolutionary conspiracy and sentenced to 10 years in Kolyma labor camps. In the early 1900s, Australian authorities often chained Aboriginal prisoners by the neck and forced them to march long distances. This disturbing photograph records a brutal system in which Indigenous people could be arrested for minor offenses and transported in chains. German prisoners captured by American and French troops gather behind barbed wire after the Battle of Blancmont Ridge in Champagne, France in 1918. The victory broke a key German defensive position and forced a retreat that helped push the First World War toward its end. In 1954, young fighters in North Vietnam's Red River Delta carried grenades on their belts as the war with French forces neared its decisive end. Life photographer Howard Sockrek captured them barefoot, armed, and strikingly young. Around 1972, Mama Cass Elliott of the Mamas and the Papas took a snowmobile ride with famous sports oddsmaker Jimmy the Greek. No clear record explains how this unlikely pair ended up together in the snow, making the strange photograph more mysterious than the ride itself. Nadezhda Krupskaya, Lenin's widow and a powerful Soviet education official, stands among workers at a new brick factory in Lobnya in 1930. The women hold freshly made bricks, turning an ordinary factory opening into a striking image of Soviet industrial propaganda. RAF air-sea rescuers reach a downed Waco glider floating in the water. Every crew member and soldier aboard was pulled to safety before the aircraft disappeared beneath the surface. A passenger carves a whole turkey dinner aboard a Pan American Stratocruiser in 1949. The double-deck aircraft offered restaurant-style meals, sleeping berths, and a lower-deck cocktail lounge during long flights. A Japanese soldier hands food to Filipino civilians during the brutal occupation from 1942 to 1945. Rare moments like this sharply contrasted with forced labor, starvation, and the terror inflicted by Japan's military police. On July 14, 1902, St. Mark's Bell Tower collapsed at 9:53, just after the surrounding area was evacuated. A technical commission had declared it safe only 2 days earlier, and the sole victim was the caretaker's cat. More than 100 Mothers Union members attended a service inside the bombed ruins of Coventry Cathedral in 1947. The cathedral had been destroyed by German bombs 7 years earlier, but worship continued beneath its shattered walls. In 1917, Lieutenant W.C. Cambray showed how an observer fired backward from a Royal Aircraft Factory FE-2D. To aim the Lewis gun over the upper wing, he had to stand exposed above the cockpit with no safety harness. This 1984 mugshot shows Arturo Durazo Moreno, the notoriously corrupt police chief of Mexico City from 1976 to 1982. A childhood friend of President José López Portillo, Durazo turned the police into a vast extortion empire and allegedly built a fortune worth up to $1 billion. In the 1930s, Wan Rong, wife of China's last emperor Puyi, reportedly smoked up to 2 ounces of opium a day. She later died in a communist prison, and her body was never found. In 1916, Austro-Hungarian soldiers turned Montenegro's parliament in Cetinje into military quarters after occupying the country. Their beds and equipment filled the chamber where lawmakers had once debated Montenegro's future. These rusting bumper cars sit in Pripyat, where nearly 50,000 people were evacuated one day after the Chernobyl explosion in 1986. Residents were told they would return within 3 days, but the radioactive city remains abandoned. On April 24, 1990, Discovery launched from Cape Canaveral carrying the $1.5 billion Hubble Space Telescope. Astronauts deployed it the next day, but a tiny flaw in its main mirror blurred the first images until a daring repair mission fixed it 3 years later. Kim Ung-yong reportedly spoke 4 languages by age 2 and solved algebra by age 3. At 8, he moved to the United States to work with NASA, becoming one of the most famous child prodigies in history. In 1926, Ku Klux Klan members filled an amusement park in Canyon City, Colorado, even riding the Ferris wheel in their white robes. At the time, the Klan controlled much of Colorado politics, including the governor's office and powerful positions in Denver. A girl sits beside her cat in the family kitchen in San Antonio in 1939. The wood-burning stove, bare dirt floor, patched walls, and reused fruit crate reveal the harsh living conditions many American families still faced after the Great Depression. This soldier proudly shows a rifle he says was taken from robbers. With another gun already on his shoulder, the photo captures how captured weapons often return straight to the battlefield. Bruce Lee launches a flying sidekick while filming The Big Boss in Thailand in 1971. The low-budget film became a record-breaking hit in Hong Kong and transformed him into Asia's biggest action star. In 1966, the future Pope Francis taught literature and psychology at El Salvador School in Buenos Aires. Known then as Jorge Mario Bergoglio, he was only 29 years old and still decades away from becoming the first pope from the Americas. Mussolini sent 6 black-shirt divisions into Ethiopia in 1935, turning his fascist militia into an invasion force. Italy captured Addis Ababa the next year after using banned mustard gas against Ethiopian troops and civilians. This rare portrait shows Ahmed Tajir, ruler of Bender Qasim, now Bosaso, in 1889. That same year, Italian expansion began turning Somalia's independent coastal sultanates into protectorates. Winston Churchill stands on the right at Armentières in February 1916, commanding a battalion of the Royal Scots Fusiliers. After the Gallipoli disaster forced him from government, he entered the trenches and served under enemy fire. Sergei Prokudin-Gorsky photographed these shackled prisoners in Bukhara between 1906 and 1911. The striking color came from 3 separate black and white exposures taken through red, green, and blue filters, decades before color photography became common. A Portuguese soldier guards a Lisbon street on April 25, 1974, as the Carnation Revolution toppled Europe's longest dictatorship in a single day. Civilians placed red carnations in soldiers' rifles, but secret police still shot and killed 4 people before surrendering. Steeplejacks removed the Statue of Liberty's massive crown spikes during renovations for the 1939 New York World's Fair. Working hundreds of feet above the ground, they balance on narrow beams with almost no safety equipment. An SS fencing club trains in Germany during the 1930s using masks, padded uniforms, and practice swords. Fencing was more than sport for the organization, which used combat training to build discipline, aggression, and obedience. In January 1901, the Spindletop well exploded into a black fountain over 100 feet high near Beaumont, Texas. It released about 100,000 barrels of oil a day, transformed the United States oil industry, and launched the Texas oil boom. On January 6, 1945, this Archival kamikaze made its final dive into the United States Navy cruiser Columbia during the Battle of Lingayen Gulf. The blast killed 17 sailors, while 21 American ships suffered direct kamikaze hits before that brutal day ended. The Great Flood of 1913 swept through Ohio after days of relentless rain, killing hundreds and destroying thousands of homes. This photograph captures a house collapsing near Cypress and Broad Streets as the ground beneath it gave way. These Jewish refugee sisters looked through a porthole aboard the St. Louis in May 1939. After escaping Nazi Germany, they were denied entry to Cuba and the United States, forcing the ship to return to Europe with more than 900 refugees. On June 5, 1989, Beijing residents faced Chinese army tanks near Tiananmen Square, one day after troops killed hundreds of protesters and civilians. Later that day, an unknown man would stop a tank column nearby, creating one of history's most censored images. 18-year-old biology student Lowell Lee Andrews watches police divers search the Kansas River for pieces of the gun he used to murder his family. Before the killings, a newspaper had called him the nicest boy in Wolcott, Kansas. In 1967, Soyuz 1 crashed after its parachute lines twisted during landing, killing cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov. The failed mission became the first fatal spaceflight, and Komarov was later honored with memorials left on the moon. Mary Moorman took this Polaroid about 1/6 of a second after the fatal shot struck President John F. Kennedy. Her photograph captured the presidential limousine, Jacqueline Kennedy, and Secret Service agent Clint Hill during the assassination in Dealey Plaza. This is Greenwood after the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921, when a white mob burned more than 1,000 homes and businesses. The attack destroyed 35 city blocks and may have killed as many as 300 people. 3 Yagan people stand in Tierra del Fuego in 1920, wrapped in animal skins against one of the harshest climates on Earth. Their ancestors survived for thousands of years by canoeing through freezing channels, hunting sea mammals, and keeping fires burning even aboard their boats. Japanese schoolgirls wear protective masks during the deadly influenza outbreak of 1920. Japan widely adopted mask wearing after the pandemic, turning a desperate medical defense into a lasting part of public life. This courtroom saw Ottoman official Mehmed Kemal Bey tried for organizing the deportation and mass killing of Armenians in Yozgat. Convicted in April 1919, he was publicly hanged in Istanbul, becoming the first Ottoman official executed for crimes committed during the genocide. Marilyn Monroe thrilled Atlantic City as Grand Marshal of the Miss America Parade on September 2, 1952. Her daring black dress caused a sensation, with thousands crowding the streets to see Hollywood's fastest rising star. The steamship Falaba sinks after the German submarine U-28 torpedoed it off Wales in 1915. The ship went under in only 8 minutes, killing more than 100 people, including the first American loss to a German submarine in the First World War. In 1937, a migrant fruit worker's family from Tennessee camped in a field near a Florida packing house. They followed each harvest for low wages, often living without proper shelter, sanitation, or steady food. On November 10, 1989, a man chipped away at the Berlin Wall near the Brandenburg Gate. One day earlier, a mistaken announcement had opened the border, sending thousands of East Berliners west and accelerating Germany's reunification. On April 4, 1944, American bombers struck Bucharest's railway yards, but many bombs fell across nearby neighborhoods. The raid killed nearly 3,000 people, making it one of the deadliest air attacks Romania suffered during the war. In 1946, Pennsylvania miner Louis Schaefer carried groceries from the Pittsburgh Coal Company store. Many miners depended on company stores, where high prices and employer-controlled credit could keep families trapped in debt. This is the control room of Chernobyl Reactor 4 shortly after the 1986 explosion, with equipment wrapped in plastic against radioactive dust. The operators had lost control of the reactor within seconds, triggering the worst nuclear disaster in history. Thousands of American B-17 bombers crowded Kingman Army Airfield in Arizona after the Second World War, many barely used. Within a few years, most were torn apart and melted into aluminum, turning a vast wartime air force into scrap. Muammar Gaddafi wore a shirt covered with portraits of African leaders he admired. The unusual outfit promoted his dream of uniting the continent as the United States of Africa. Charles Arthur Floyd was a feared bank robber during the Great Depression, better known as Pretty Boy Floyd. Stories claimed he destroyed mortgage papers during robberies, turning a violent outlaw into a folk hero for families facing foreclosure. In 1936, Jack Sullivan smiled and smoked a cigar moments before entering the lethal gas chamber. He was executed for killing railroad officer John Bradbury during a gunfight. In Afghanistan in 2004, a dog stood beside the rifle, helmet, and boots, honoring a fallen American soldier. The battlefield cross was a military tradition used to remember a comrade killed in war. In 1918, women at a Lancashire factory relaxed on stacks of newly made asbestos mattresses. Decades later, scientists proved that inhaling asbestos fibers could cause fatal diseases, including lung cancer and mesothelioma. In 1923, a Hollywood woman pointed to an anti-Japanese sign outside her home that declared the area a white neighborhood. Residents displayed it after Japanese Americans bought nearby land for a church, exposing the open racism Asian immigrants faced in Los Angeles. The atomic bomb exploded about 600 meters above Hiroshima, almost directly over this building, killing everyone inside. Because the blast struck from nearly overhead, parts of its reinforced frame survived, and the ruin became the atomic bomb dome. This Mitsubishi Zero was found wrecked at Munda Airfield in the Solomon Islands in September 1943. Its red rising sun markings still survived, but the once feared Japanese fighter had been torn apart and abandoned among shattered palm trees. On December 4, 1959, Sam, a 7-pound rhesus monkey, blasted 55 miles above Earth in a Mercury capsule. He survived the flight and was recovered alive 200 miles out in the Atlantic Ocean. On June 29, 1933, Adolf Hitler visited President Paul von Hindenburg and his grandson at the Neudeck estate. 13 months later, Hindenburg died, and Hitler merged the presidency with the chancellorship, removing the last office above him. This crowd arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau in May or June of 1944, during the mass deportation of Hungarian Jews. After a quick selection, most children, elderly people, and mothers were sent directly to the gas chambers. In 1944, rescuers carry a woman through the dust after a German 5.2 rocket strike in Britain. The supersonic weapon arrived faster than sound, so victims heard no warning before the explosion. At Ahmad and Felicia Rashad's wedding in 1985, Orenthal James Simpson served as best man. Bill Cosby stood beside them as a groomsman, placing 3 major television and sports stars in one remarkable photograph. On April 7th and 8th, 1995, Russian forces killed an estimated 100 to 300 civilians in Samashki, Chechnya. Survivors said people were shot or burned inside their homes, while much of the village was destroyed and the local school was blown up. On August 8, 1969, coffee heiress and social worker Abigail Folger planned to leave Los Angeles the next day. Hours later, the Manson family invaded Sharon Tate's home, and Folger was stabbed 28 times while trying to escape across the lawn. Nazi doctor Karl Vernet implanted artificial hormone glands into gay prisoners at Buchenwald, claiming he could cure homosexuality. After the war, he escaped prosecution by faking a heart condition and fled to Argentina, where he lived freely until his death. In 1975, a Senate investigation exposed a silent CIA pistol designed to fire a tiny dart filled with deadly shellfish toxin. The dart could leave only a small red mark, while the poison was nearly impossible to detect during an autopsy. In 1944, 19-year-old Phyllis Stalnaker was arrested in San Diego and labeled a weedhead and a tramp. Her mugshot reveals how police once recorded suspected marijuana use and a woman's lifestyle as defining offenses. Let's get 1,000 subscribers on this channel. I will be very grateful to you.